The following BLTV program is brought to you by O'Flaherty Law. Please enjoy.
Greetings of the day, my fellow listeners, and welcome to another edition of Seize Your Business. My name is Steve Eschbach. I am your host. I am also the owner of Trans World Business Advisors here in Naperville. I am one of 7 Chicagoland Trans World offices here. In a global environment, we have over 200 offices worldwide. We are the largest business brokerage firm in the world, and we're also the fastest growing. And another credential for me is I am one of the owners of the Business Lounge. We are delighted to have you join us today. Our Seize Your Business podcast series is designed to assist you to learn how perhaps to do a better job of running your business, improving your top line revenues and your bottom line profitability. And I'm delighted to have someone who's a specialist in that area, Jim Waszak, who is a former chief financial officer and now has a consulting practice where he does the same with the clients that he interacts with. So Jim, first of all, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, for those of you who have a little bit of a historical background on Seize Your Business, you may see and recognize the face of my guest, because Jim Waszak was a former host and participant in the Seize Your Business podcast series a short while ago. And we've kind of changed hats a little bit here. So again, thanks so much, Jim, for joining us. Tell us a little bit right now about what you're doing. You're a former CFO in a corporate executive world. You're doing consulting work right now. Tell us a little bit more about Jim that the audience doesn't know about yet.
Well, as you say, I was CFO at a company for a long time. The company wound up having some operational difficulties, so I moved into more of an operations role. But what I've experienced in all of that is there's always different types of issues that get in the way of people performing at their best, whether it's running their business or their career or their finances or personal relationships or whatever. And I found people asking me for support in all those areas. So I've been pretty blessed that since my CFO days, I still do some consulting as a CFO, but it's really broadened into all forms of performance improvement. And I've helped people with marketing and repositioning their business. I've helped job seekers, and I've even interjected a little fun into the world by having an improv class for business people.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept because people probably wouldn't think that improv and interviewing for jobs or being effective in business development, some might not connect the two when in fact they are pretty much very well connected if you do it correctly. Before we get more into that, let me talk a little bit about you and your upbringing. Tell us a little bit about where you were born, how you were raised, what your interests were way back then, and what kind of influence your parents and family had on you to create the Jim Waszak we know today.
Well, okay, great question. I was born on the south side of Chicago. My parents were not deeply educated. I don't think they even finished high school, but my dad started a business, and he had a successful printing business for many years. In fact, I remember I was about 6 or 7 years old, and he took me with him to a printing equipment convention, and he had me show the people there how I could turn on these presses and run them. So that was pretty cool. We used to we used to enjoy going to stock car races and amusement parks. I think my parents had always very high standards for me and expectations, which mostly is a good thing. And 81, I got married. I finished college. I have a degree in business economics, and then later an MBA, and then later a CPA. And I don't know, now I'm avid golfer. Along the way, I was a huge amusement park buff. I've been to most of the big roller coasters in the whole country. And I don't know, I guess I can go on and on, but those are kind of the highlights.
So in your upbringing, when you were a child, did you have aspirations of being a chief financial officer or an operational wizard, so to speak, or was your interest somewhere else? Like most of us, yeah, we want to be a baseball player. That never happens. Or, maybe you were in marketing, but you went to CFO. What kind of, I already know that your parents had an influence on you because your father owned a business. So there's the entrepreneurial spirit inside of you.
Right.
But you were growing up, what were your interests and how much are they different from where you are today?
Okay, fair question. I would say when I was growing up, I didn't get a lot of what you might call career guidance from my parents. I don't think they really knew much other than get some education and you'll have a better life. I guess I probably always had a little bit of a penchant for keeping track of things. Always enjoyed that. But when I went to college, to be candid, I wasn't even sure I wanted to go. I think I was kind of irritated about having to make those kind of decisions. And I guess part of me wished I could just stay a kid. But I did wind up going to Benedictine University. And the only thing I could think of in terms of a major was math, because I was always pretty good at math in high school. So I started out as a math major. After about a year, little bit of thinking I did is I said, well, what am I going to do with a math major? So I said, maybe I should take some business classes. I was going to take an economics class, but it was filled by the time I got there. So I wound up taking accounting. I said, well, that was pretty similar to economics. And of course, being a math major, accounting, at least in the early stages, pretty easy stuff. And I kind of bonded a little bit with one of my teachers. And so when I was getting out of school, his advice to me was, go work for a CPA firm. It's not gonna hurt you, and you'll learn a lot. So I did, and didn't really like it, to be candid, because it was, you'd go home one night and then they'd call you and say, "Oh, tomorrow you're going to this town or that town or whatever." Going downtown was a hassle. So I quit the firm and wound up taking a job at a small company, and pretty quickly was accounting manager there. And I didn't like that either. But my boss left, and I was promoted. So here I was, I don't know, I was maybe 27 years old, and I'm on the management team of a company. I was getting a company car, which was a Z28 Camaro, and life was good. So I stayed there, and then, as I said, we were having a lot of problems in the plant. And so one day I went to the owner and I said, "Why don't you let me run it?" And he says, "Well, you're an accountant. What do you know about manufacturing?" And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about manufacturing, but I know the people and I know they need a leader." And that was really the key. And in a little over a year's time, we got output up like 50%, made a ton of money, and gave me a much broader perspective on life. So hopefully I answered your question without rambling too much, but let me know if you need more.
Jim, you hit the nail right on the head, because I think you demonstrated that people skills are fairly important. In fact, they're critically important in successful business operations, because you may know the numbers, but you got to be able to communicate and effectively interact with both employees internally as well as outside vendors, suppliers, etc. So I think, Jim, what you're saying is that being able to communicate and effectively interact with people is critically essential for success. Am I right?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. Interesting. The fellow that I worked for, we had many. He's a great guy, but we had many ongoing disagreements. And the big core of it was that he had instituted a bonus program for the executives that was based on profit. So I'm, especially from the CFO position, I'm looking, hey, we could do this, we could do that. And he was reluctant for various reasons. What I understand in retrospect is two things. One is that profit, while that was his stated objective, it wasn't his real objective. His real objective was, number one, growth. Number two, take care of the people that work for him. So if I had understood that then, it would have been a lot easier to get on the same page with him and suggest things that would be truly win-win. But I was under the impression, profit was the thing. So yeah, I think just understanding where people are coming from is huge. I will share another story with you. When I moved into that role, we had a fellow who was running our shipping and receiving department. He was a burly blue collar guy, and he wasn't doing a very good job. But he had been with the company for a long time, so it was kind of a dilemma because I really didn't particularly want to have to let him go, but I knew I had to have a better performance. So one day I was at the company softball game, and the same guy is leading and coaching and directing and managing, and I said, wow, this guy really got some leadership ability. So sat down and I asked him, how can we bring that to work? So we got into a conversation, and he pointed out that his big challenge was the people that worked for him were relatively low on the pay grade scale. So if he got good people, they'd quickly move to another position. And if he got bad people, they were stuck with him. He was stuck with them. So we resolved that. We gave him some training and coaching, and the guy turned into a gem. And when I was leaving the company, he put his arm around me. He said, I'm really going to miss you. You changed my life. So that I thought was always a cool thing to be able to change somebody's life.
Absolutely. Jim, one of the things I really wanted to go over with you too is that, and in the interest of full disclosure, Jim and I know each other from various other networking events. Jim is a volunteer, or was a volunteer, with the Career Networking Center, which is a job resource organization here in Naperville that assists those that are in need of a next career, next job, if you will. And one of the topics that he talks about, actually two, one is how improv, you can use that in the interviewing process. And also he talks about the art of storytelling. And it sounds like that might be all kind of, maybe not really pertinent to the matter at hand, but it is, because improv gets you comfortable in doing what you need to do. And the art of storytelling demonstrates how successful you can be with specific examples. So that's kind of my understanding of improv, storytelling, success in searching for a job, success in what you did. And you just gave us an example of how you turned one of your leaders at your other company into a big successful leader. Tell us a little bit more about improv and storytelling and everything else along with business and job search. I think the audience would be extremely interested in that.
Sure. Well, I guess the starting point would be that I noticed one of the universal or almost universal challenges that people had in job searching was just very, very uncomfortable with the interview process. And I think people perceive it as they have some kind of test to pass, as opposed to, like you described, our time today as just being conversational. So I also, because I like comedy, and it's probably another big aspect of me. I love to laugh, and I love to make people laugh. Sometimes to the chagrin of my wife, but that's another story. And I noticed that I took some improv classes, which for me was very natural. But I just noticed how people who started out in the classes kind of very shy, and by the end of the class, they were much less so. So I encourage people really to take it, because I think it makes you more comfortable in many different settings. And then related to that is the storytelling piece. And rather than what I started coaching people to do is rather than tell somebody about who you are or what you are, show them. Now, the way you show them in an interview is a story. So the advantages of story is one, it's much easier than trying to answer a question because you're just relating it to people, what actually happened. And I think it's much easier for the person to hear it and listen because, again, it's more interesting. So as an example of that, when I told you about the success I had taking over the manufacturing operation, and if you were interviewing me, I could have said, well, I have leadership skills and I have strategy skills and I have people skills. And while those things are true, if you don't know me, those are just words. Anybody can say that. But if I give a story like I did, company was struggling, and once I got involved, I talked with the people, I asked them what they needed, gave them what they needed. The company did a lot better. You get a much more a richer perspective on who I am. And like I say, it's easier to do, and it's more interesting for them to hear.
So the other comment that you made earlier in our discussion here today, Jim, was that you like to keep track of things. And many people know that accountability is critical for successful performance. And again, no matter what you're doing, if you're doing a job search, you need to be accountable on the efforts you need to get that next job. If you're in business development, you need accountability to keep track of your outreach and what kind of successes you get with the outreach. So I think that all ties together. And again, I think improv gets a little more comfortable in an ad hoc environment, meaning that, you don't have the opportunity to prepare. You have to be able to respond instantaneously. But with that arsenal of stories in your back pocket to help that whole process, I think that demonstrates that you're a little more genuine in what you've done and what you can do. Am I right about that, Jim?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And I think, you touched on 2 points, so let me cover both of them. One is keeping track of things. And what I've found, and of course, I didn't invent this idea, I've heard it many places, but simply by keeping track of something, you change it, you change the outcomes. And one example that comes to mind, and this is sort of demonstrates how storytelling works, but when I was in the CFO role, I had a lady working for me who, very capable, and she was in charge of accounts receivable. Of course, she had never done any kind of collections type work. She was more like a bookkeeper type clerk. So I made up a simple measuring device. And I said, okay, what percent of our, and I think it was something like this, what percent of our over 90 days bills have been paid? What percent of our over 60? What percent of our over 30? And we would just sit down, usually once a month or so and go over it. And, she, just by tracking that information, she was very focused and she was getting great results. So once you tell somebody something's important, they tend to focus on it. A similar story was there was never a lot of communication with the plant in terms of how they were doing. So I started posting every month what our output goal was and what we achieved. And at first I did it just kind of as an experiment. I don't know if anybody's going to pay any attention to this, but let's put it up there. And after a couple of months, unfortunately, I was told not to do it because it tends to give too much information away to customers who might tour the plant as to how big or small we are. So I had to stop doing it. So when I stopped doing it, I was surprised. People were coming up to me, where's that data? People want to know how they're doing. Measuring is important. And I guess I just like doing it right. Keep track of many things in my life. Certainly, I'm an avid golfer, so I track all my golf statistics and pretty much anything I can. I kind of like measuring things.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing that I wanted to bring up here too. So now that you're in your consulting role and you're doing what you did at the manufacturing company you did in the past, are there any particular types of clients that you like to interact with more so than others? Do you have a niche, if you will, or
Yes, I would say small to mid-sized businesses. I've been fortunate. I've worked with some one-man entrepreneurial businesses, and I've also done some work for General Motors. So it's kind of run the gamut. But the best is, the companies in the, 5 to 30, $40 million range, because it's much easier to get things done. The people are usually more interested in the business results rather than, just keeping their job. And in terms of, I've worked in many different industries. I mean, I certainly know manufacturing. I'm a car guy, so I like cars. But really, the thing is, I just want to help people succeed. I just hate to see people putting an effort and not getting results. And sometimes it's just a little tweak or a little difference in perspective, and that makes all the difference in the world.
Totally agree, Jim. So we're running out of time here for our Seize Your Business episode today. Is there anything that I haven't covered in any of the questions I asked you that you think the audience really needs to know?
Well, I would just say, Steve, I never run out of time for talking to you. So it's maybe you might be running out of time for me, which I get that a lot. I guess I would say, the last comment I'll make then is the most overlooked resource in a company and the most underused skill is people and listening. And we were well, I'll tell you this other story. So once upon a time, I met a guy for the first time for business networking, and he was talking about all his plans and what he was doing and everything, and he was really engaged, and I really left the conversation feeling like, gee, I didn't contribute much because I didn't say too much. But he makes a point as we're leaving, says, man, I want to tell you, I really enjoyed the conversation. And that really struck me. And I think just being listened to is a powerful tool because nobody is today. Everybody's rushing around and got a million things on their mind. And, my wife will get mad at me sometimes. We'll go in a restaurant or a retail store, and I'll go out of my way to make some silly comment to the staff, and she gets mad at me. But I feel like those people are just never really noticed as people, and so when I do that, they really perk up. So that's my final comment is be a good listener, and you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish.
So I'm actually going to have a final comment here on this interview. So for those of you who haven't read my book, my first book, which was called Link, Learn, Leverage, there is a chapter that features Jim. And the title of the chapter is it one-on-one or 3-on-3? And kiddingly, people think I'm talking about a pickup game of basketball, but that's not the case. When Jim and I get together on our various luncheon meetings or whatnot, he said, Steve, I want you to bring 3 names to the table, and I'm going to do the same. And interestingly enough, a couple of years ago, he brought 3 names to me. Each of them were business owners. All 3 of them became selling clients of my Transworld Business Advisors. So I like that term. Is it one-on-one or 3-on-3? And it's, to your point, you're talking about measuring things and being specific. And that was powerful because the 3 names you gave me ultimately turned into listings that I had for my trend. So again, and it goes to listening to Jim,
right,
understanding his principles. So I totally agree with you. You got to listen, learn, and respond as opposed to just tell. If you're just telling, then basically it's you, and not them. I think it's got to be interactive, and you got to be caring, responsive, and that I think relating to people is a more effective way of, quote, seizing your business. How about that?
Somebody told me early in my career as an independent consultant, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Absolutely.
And that's a real good term to use. And I think that applies to, business, to sales, to career, to, relationships. Just people don't haven't learned to listen enough. Listen and empathize.
A mantra for life in general. Last question, Jim. How do we go
Yes,
to
sir.
find out more about you? Where do we go? We go to LinkedIn. We go to a website. How do we find out more
Yeah,
about?
most of my work has come through some form of networking, but probably the best. There's probably two places you could look. One is LinkedIn. I have my profile up there with lots of information. The other thing you could do is go on YouTube and just search on my name, and you'll find 3 different kinds of videos. Some are simply informative. Some are interviews, because I've done a lot of interviews, both for Seize Your Business and other purposes. And some are just pure silliness and comedy. So if you were to look at me on YouTube, you'd get a perspective. In fact, one guy told me once, I met him only once, and he hired me to do a little consulting for him. And in our hiring conversation, I said, "Well, do you want to ask me any questions about me, or do you need to know more about me?" He said, "No, I feel like I know you already because I've watched your videos." So that's another tip, is use video.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Jim. Hey, thanks so much for your time, Jim. And thank
Steve,
you,
it's my
audience.
pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, audience, for joining us for another edition of Seize Your Business. Stay tuned. There'll be plenty more of interviews to help you, of course, seize your business. Thanks so much, and have a good day.